Somewhere in America, a thrift store employee looked at a porcelain clown lamp holding a Bible and a fishing rod and said, "Yeah, someone will definitely want this." And that's the magical thing about thrift stores. They're not just places where old stuff goes to die. They're museums of questionable life decisions, shelves packed with objects that clearly had a story, and probably a restraining order attached to it. Because at some point, a real human being bought these things brand new, proudly carried them home, and thought, yes, this belongs in my living room. But what you're about to see isn't just weird, it's the kind of strange that makes you stop mid-aisle, stare at the shelf, and wonder what series of events led this object to exist in the first place. And trust me, the deeper we go, the less sense any of it starts to make. 1. I once picked up what looked like a normal ceramic mug at a thrift store, which is always the first mistake, because thrift stores follow a simple rule. If something looks normal, give it 3 seconds. I turned the mug around and discovered it said, "World's okayest parole officer." Not best, not greatest, just okayest. Which immediately raises questions about the entire criminal justice system. Somewhere out there, a parole officer woke up one morning, drank coffee from this mug, and thought, yeah, this accurately represents my professional standards. And then somehow, that mug traveled the long emotional journey from an office desk, to a donation bin, to a thrift store shelf next to a Garfield bowl from 1989. Which means either the parole officer retired, got fired, or someone finally staged a workplace intervention and confiscated the mug like it was evidence in a trial. 2. Thrift stores have a special talent for selling items that clearly belong to someone who made extremely confident decorating choices. Like the time I found a life-size cardboard cutout of a dentist smiling while holding oversized teeth. Not a celebrity dentist, not even a famous dental brand mascot. Just a random guy in scrubs who looked like he was aggressively excited about flossing. And the weirdest part wasn't that it existed. Marketing departments do strange things all the time. The weirdest part was imagining the person who thought, you know what my living room needs? A 6-foot dentist silently judging my dental hygiene. Because you don't accidentally end up owning a cardboard dentist. That's a purchase that required transportation, commitment, and probably at least one concerned friend asking, why are you bringing that home? 3. One thrift store shelf had a framed inspirational quote that said, "Live, laugh, lasagna. Not love, lasagna." And the frame itself looked suspiciously expensive, like someone genuinely invested money into immortalizing pasta-based wisdom. Now look, I respect lasagna. It's a strong food, layered, reliable. But it's not exactly a guiding philosophy for life. Nobody survives a major crisis by whispering, "Remember, lasagna." Yet, at some point, a person walked into a home decor store, saw this phrase, and thought, yes, this is the emotional anchor my household needs. And years later, it ended up at a thrift store, sitting between a cracked snow globe and a porcelain duck, quietly reminding shoppers that somewhere out there is a kitchen wall that once treated lasagna like a lifestyle movement. 4. One of my favorite thrift store mysteries was a brand new treadmill, converted into a clothing rack. The belt still worked. The power cord was taped to the side like it had been intentionally disarmed. Someone clearly bought this treadmill with the optimism of a New Year's resolution and the life expectancy of a houseplant. And instead of selling it immediately after abandoning their fitness dreams, they repurposed it into something much more realistic. A machine designed to hold hoodies and jeans. Honestly, it's probably the most honest use of a treadmill I've ever seen. Because, let's face it, most treadmills don't actually run. They just quietly collect laundry, while their owners eat snacks nearby and promise themselves they'll start exercising on Monday. And Monday, as we all know, is a mythical creature. 5. I once saw a porcelain figurine of 2 frogs getting married, dressed in a tuxedo and a wedding gown, which means somewhere there was a frog-themed wedding decor market that apparently needed supply. The frogs were standing under a tiny arch made of plastic flowers, staring at each other like they were about to promise eternal swamp-based loyalty. Now imagine the human being who purchased this, not received it as a joke, bought it. That person walked into a store and thought, this frog wedding statue perfectly captures the emotional essence of my living room. And I guarantee it wasn't alone. These frogs had friends. There were probably frog bridesmaids, frog groomsmen, and a frog priest somewhere in that house. The thrift store was just the final chapter in what I assume was a very amphibian-heavy interior design phase. 6. Thrift stores also love selling items that feel like props from a movie no one remembers making, like the giant velvet painting of Elvis, riding a wolf, under a full moon. Not standing next to a wolf, riding it like a majestic rock and roll warrior. And Elvis looked extremely confident about the situation, which honestly makes it worse, because somebody commissioned this painting. This wasn't a random art experiment. This was a deliberate artistic vision that required time, paint, and probably at least one conversation that began with, "Hear me out." And at some point, someone hung that painting proudly on their wall, inviting guests into a home where Elvis Presley apparently moonlights as a supernatural wolf rider. 7. I once found a cookbook titled Microwave Cooking for Men Who Don't Cook, which is already hilarious because microwaves have exactly two settings, heat and regret. The book proudly featured recipes like microwave scrambled eggs, which feels less like cooking and more like scientific experimentation. But the real question is why this book needed to exist in the first place. Who was the target audience here? Men who looked at a microwave and thought, "This technology is too complex. I need guidance." Imagine opening a cookbook and discovering the instructions are basically, put food inside the box and press the big glowing number. At that point, the microwave isn't the problem. Society might be. 8. Another thrift store shelf featured a lamp shaped like a cowboy boot, wearing sunglasses. The boot had a face. The sunglasses were glued on at a slightly crooked angle, giving the whole thing the personality of a tired bar bouncer. And apparently it was functional because the light bulb stuck out of the top, like the cowboy boot had a brilliant idea. The real mystery isn't the design. Weird lamps happen. The mystery is the person who looked at this and thought, "Yes, my bedroom lighting should come from a sentient boot." Because that's not just decor. That's a conversation starter, and not the good kind. The kind where guests quietly wonder if you lost a bet. 9. Thrift stores are also where abandoned hobby phases go to die. For example, the entire shelf of professional cake decorating equipment that clearly belonged to someone who watched exactly one baking show and got overconfident. There were piping bags, metal nozzles, specialty frosting tools. Everything needed to create cakes that look like edible architecture. And then right next to them was a beginner cookbook titled Your First Cake, which tells you everything you need to know about how this story ended. Because baking shows have convinced millions of people that decorating cakes is easy. It's not. It's basically edible engineering. And judging by the fact that all this equipment ended up at a thrift store, someone learned that lesson the hard way. 10. I once discovered a plush toy shaped like a slice of pizza, wearing a graduation cap. No explanation, no brand logo, just a pizza that apparently completed higher education, which raises some fascinating academic questions. What did the pizza study? Culinary arts, economics, philosophy? And why does a pizza need a degree in the first place? It's already pizza. It's already achieved peak popularity. But somewhere out there, someone saw this plush toy and thought it was an inspiring symbol of success. Because nothing motivates young minds like a sentient pizza achieving academic excellence. 11. One thrift store had an entire box labeled decorative spoons, which sounds harmless until you actually look at them, because decorative spoons are not designed to be used. They're designed to hang on walls like tiny metallic trophies for people who collect spoons for reasons nobody fully understands. And the spoons had city names engraved on them. Paris, Rome, New York, like someone traveled the world and thought, "I should commemorate this experience with a tiny spoon." Imagine flying across an ocean, exploring historic landmarks, experiencing different cultures, and your main souvenir is a spoon the size of a bookmark. 12. At one point, I found a ceramic statue of a cat, dressed as Napoleon Bonaparte, tiny hat, little military jacket, everything. And the cat looked extremely serious about its role in European history. Now, I'm not an art critic, but I feel confident saying Napoleon never commanded an army of cats. Yet someone sculpted this with remarkable detail, which suggests there's an entire market for historical cats. Maybe there's a George Washington cat somewhere, a Shakespeare cat, a Julius Caesar cat dramatically crossing a litter box, and someone out there probably has a full collection. 13. There was also a VHS tape labeled Learn to Use the Internet, which is hilarious because the only way to watch the tutorial is by using technology that became obsolete before the internet tutorial itself finished loading. It's like buying a guide on how to drive a spaceship, written for horse owners. And yet, at some point, this tape was considered cutting-edge education. Someone sat in their living room watching a grainy video explaining what an email address is, while the world quietly moved forward and invented social media, smartphones, and online shopping. 14. One thrift store shelf displayed a portrait of a random child that clearly wasn't famous. No label, no signature, just a frame painting of a kid staring directly into your soul. Which raises the obvious question, why would anyone donate this? Family portraits usually stay in families unless something extremely dramatic happened. That painting tells a story, and I'm not sure I want to know what it is. Because somewhere out there is a person who walked into a thrift store, saw the portrait of a stranger's child, and thought, perfect, my hallway needs this mysterious kid. 15. And finally, my personal favorite. A giant novelty check made out to someone named Gary for $1 million. No bank name, no event title, just Gary, apparently winning the financial lottery of absolutely nothing. The check was framed, which means Gary once displayed this proudly like it was a legitimate achievement. Maybe it came from a workplace contest. Maybe it was a prank. Or maybe Gary just enjoyed living in a world where he was technically a millionaire, as long as nobody tried to cash the check. And eventually even Gary decided it was time to let the dream go, which is how his imaginary fortune ended up on a thrift store wall. 16. I once found a brand new self-help book titled How to Declutter Your Life, sitting in a thrift store donation bin with about 20 identical copies, which is honestly the most honest ending that book could possibly have, because the author probably spent 300 pages explaining how owning fewer things leads to happiness, inner peace, and spiritual clarity, and the readers responded by immediately getting rid of the book. Mission accomplished, technically. Somewhere out there is a motivational speaker proudly telling audiences their advice changed lives, while a thrift store quietly holds the physical evidence that nobody wanted to keep the manual for longer than a week. And I respect that level of irony. A book about minimalism becoming clutter is basically the universe performing stand-up comedy. 17. I once picked up a snow globe that contained a miniature Las Vegas slot machine instead of snow. No snowflakes, no winter scenery, just tiny plastic coins permanently frozen in mid-jackpot, like the happiest moment in a gambling addiction. Which means someone decided the peaceful aesthetic of a snow globe wasn't exciting enough and thought, what if this relaxing decorative object also reminded me of financial risk? And honestly, that feels very American. Most snow globes celebrate places like Paris or New York. This one celebrates the emotional experience of losing $200 at 2 a.m., while a slot machine plays cheerful music. The fact that it ended up in a thrift store suggests one of two things happened. Either the owner finally quit gambling, or the snow globe also lost money somehow. 18. At another thrift store, I discovered a giant motivational poster that simply said teamwork, featuring a group of dolphins jumping over a rainbow, which is interesting because dolphins are many things: intelligent, social, occasionally suspicious, but they're not exactly famous for corporate productivity. Yet somehow, corporate America decided dolphins represent synergy. I stood there imagining an office manager proudly hanging this poster in a conference room where employees are slowly dying inside during a Monday meeting. Nothing boosts morale like aquatic mammals performing acrobatics while your boss explains quarterly targets. And eventually, someone in that office must have snapped. One day they looked at the dolphins and thought, you know what? These dolphins are lying to me. And that's probably how the poster ended up between a broken stapler and a Garfield mug. 19. One thrift store shelf featured a board game called Real Estate Tycoon, 1993 edition, which immediately tells you two things. First, someone bought this game during the exact historical moment when people thought property values would go up forever. And second, Someone later realized the board game experience of arguing about mortgages with friends was somehow less fun than the real version. I opened the box and half the fake money was missing, which honestly makes the game more realistic. Real estate games always promise wealth and success, but in reality, they mostly teach you how quickly friendships collapse when someone raises rent. Somewhere out there, a group of friends started playing this game with optimism and ended the night debating property taxes like tired suburban parents. 20. I once saw a coffee table book titled The Beauty of Concrete, and I don't mean architecture, I mean literal sidewalks and parking lots. Page after page of professionally photographed concrete slabs, like they were Renaissance paintings, which means someone dedicated their career to saying, "Look at this sidewalk, truly inspiring." And I admire the confidence, because it takes a special kind of artistic courage to look at a gray parking structure and think, this deserves a hardcover book. But apparently the audience for concrete appreciation wasn't large enough to keep the book out of the thrift store. Now it sits quietly on a shelf, waiting for the next person who feels emotionally moved by a photograph of a sidewalk. 21. I found a novelty clock shaped like a slice of toast, with the numbers burned into it like grill marks, and every hour the clock made a popping sound like a toaster ejecting bread, which sounds cute until you realize that means your living room randomly produces toast noises throughout the day. Imagine sitting peacefully at home and suddenly hearing pop from the wall like your furniture just completed breakfast. Somewhere out there, someone thought this was charming. They probably bought it during a phase where their personality was quirky kitchen humor. And eventually, even they had to admit that living with a talking piece of toast is exhausting. 22. One thrift store had a framed certificate for Employee of the Month, awarded in 2004 to someone named Dennis. No company name. No explanation. Just Dennis, apparently dominating the workplace in ways history refuses to clarify. I stared at it for a while, trying to imagine Dennis's story. Was he a retail hero, a warehouse legend, a fast food champion who mastered the drive-thru headset? We'll never know. All we know is that Dennis once peaked professionally in 2004, framed the evidence, and later decided it no longer deserved wall space. And that's the most humbling career arc imaginable, going from workplace champion to thrift store mystery. 23. I once discovered a giant decorative pineapple made entirely out of polished brass. And if you know anything about interior design history, you know pineapples were once a symbol of hospitality, which means somewhere a homeowner proudly displayed this heavy metallic fruit as a message to guests. Welcome to my home, please admire my extremely shiny pineapple. The object weighed about as much as a bowling ball, which suggests it could also function as emergency self-defense. And honestly, that might explain why it was donated. Because at some point someone looked at this enormous brass fruit and realized they were living with a decorative object capable of causing blunt force trauma. 24. I once picked up a training VHS titled How to Be More Charismatic, which is already suspicious because charisma is usually the one personality trait that doesn't come with a tutorial tape. The cover showed a man in a suit smiling with the confidence of someone who definitely introduces himself with a handshake that lasts too long. I imagine the video starts with helpful advice like maintain eye contact and slowly escalates into stand too close to people while explaining your business idea. The best part is imagining someone sitting alone in their living room practicing charisma in front of a television like it's a workout routine. 25. One thrift store shelf had a tiny statue of Bigfoot holding a surfboard, and the level of detail suggested the artist took this concept extremely seriously. Which means somewhere out there is a creative mind who looked at the legendary forest creature known for hiding in remote mountains and thought, but what if he also enjoys beach culture? I like to imagine the full story. Bigfoot spends weekdays avoiding hikers in the Pacific Northwest, then secretly drives to California to catch waves on weekends. Honestly, it's the most relaxed version of the myth I've ever seen. 26. I once found a giant decorative plate that simply said, "Bless this mess," which is one of those phrases that tries very hard to sound charming, while quietly admitting chaos has completely taken over the house. It's the home decor equivalent of shrugging. Imagine inviting guests over, and the first thing they see is a plate on the wall basically saying, Look, we gave up, and I respect the honesty. Because modern interior design often pretends everything is perfect. This plate is different. This plate accepts that the kitchen probably contains 3 unfinished projects, a stack of dishes, and a mysterious drawer full of rubber bands. 27. One thrift store had a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a human head. Not a cartoon head. A strangely realistic human head, smiling politely while holding baked goods inside its skull. The lid was the top of the head, which meant every time someone wanted a cookie, they had to remove part of this ceramic person's brain. I don't know who designed this, but I'm confident they were the same type of artist who thinks mannequins are comforting. Somewhere out there, a family once kept cookies inside this smiling ceramic human, and nobody in the house questioned it. 28. I found a framed motivational quote that read, "Dream big," hanging inside a frame shaped like a dollar sign, which feels like a very honest summary of the modern self-help industry. Dream big, preferably about money. The quote itself wasn't signed by anyone famous. No philosopher, no author. Just anonymous encouragement floating inside a giant golden dollar symbol, like capitalism, trying to give you a pep talk. And eventually someone looked at it long enough to realize the decoration itself was more honest than the quote. 29. At one point I saw a giant foam cowboy hat designed to hold 6 cans of soda. Not beer, soda, which means this was either designed for extremely enthusiastic tailgate parties or someone who wanted to stay hydrated while impersonating a rodeo mascot. The hat had built-in cup holders and plastic tubes that connected to straws like a complicated hydration system invented by a bored engineer. And honestly, if you're wearing a hat that stores beverages above your head, you've reached a level of confidence most people can only admire from a distance. 30. I once discovered a photo album full of pictures of someone's vacation to Niagara Falls, and the photos were incredibly specific. The same waterfall from slightly different angles, over and over again. Page after page of identical water, which means someone spent an entire vacation thinking, this next photo will really capture the waterfall differently. Eventually, they must have realized the album contained 50 pictures of the same waterfall doing the exact same thing. So the album was donated, leaving future thrift store visitors to quietly flip through a stranger's extremely repetitive vacation memories. 31. And finally, my personal favorite thrift store mystery. A gold trophy engraved with the words, "Second Place Chili Cook-Off Champion," which is already a masterpiece of competitive optimism. Because technically, it's celebrating someone who did not win, but still wanted a trophy large enough to display proudly. I imagine the cook bringing this home and telling everyone, listen, the judges were clearly confused, but the real question is why the trophy ended up at the thrift store. Did the chili champion upgrade to first place later in life? Or did they eventually look at the trophy and realize it was a permanent reminder that somewhere out there is a person whose chili was slightly better? So, there you have it. A gentle reminder that humanity has spent decades producing objects that make absolutely no sense, and then generously donating them so the rest of us can stand in a thrift store aisle wondering what went wrong. If you've ever spotted something even more ridiculous sitting on a dusty shelf somewhere, drop it in the comments so we can all collectively question reality together. And while you're down there, feel free to vote for the dumbest one from today, like the video. If you enjoyed the chaos, subscribe if you're brave enough for more of it, because trust me, the thrift store universe still has plenty of unexplained artifacts left.